Hello, and welcome to Lip Service, a podcast that adventures around and all down the line with the Rolling Stones. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Simon Harper, and I shall be your host for this series of conversations that celebrate the life and music of the greatest rock and roll band in the world. We've got sights and sounds and marvels to delight your eyes and ears, so join us as we journey down the road a piece, from Dartford days to Hackney Diamonds and beyond, exploring the songs and stories from along the way with friends and special guests. Today's guest is Tony King, a man whose life reads like a backstage pass to some of the defining moments in rock and roll history. From starting at Decca Records at just 16 in 1958, Tony's path in promotions led him to work with some of the most influential artists of our time, including the Beatles, John Lennon, Elton John, and of course the Rolling Stones. He first encountered the Stones in the early 1960s and soon became part of their world through his work at Andrew Loog Oldham's Immediate Records, where his flair for promotion and deep understanding of artists' needs earned him lasting respect. From there he became a trusted member of their inner circle, eventually working closely with the band and especially with Mick Jagger across 20 years and 6 world tours. Whether managing publicity, orchestrating global press events, offering sage advice, or even saving the lives of the band's pets, Tony brought clarity, care and creativity to every chapter as a trusted companion. His memoir, The Tastemaker, offers a front row seat to the seismic shifts in music and culture over the past 6 decades. From fond memories of time spent with Lennon, Elton and Jagger, to the devastating tragedies of the 80s AIDS crisis, all told through the lens of someone who not only witnessed but also survived these consequential moments. The Times shortlisted The Tastemaker as one of their favourite music books of 2023. If you haven't yet read it, I highly recommend that you do. In my conversation with Tony, we discuss his first impressions of the Stones, how he formed a lifelong friendship with Charlie Watts, how he navigated the turbulent waters between Mick and Keith in the 80s, and why he once had to admonish Hollywood royalty during a Stones gig. Here now is my interview with my good friend, Tony King. Tony, welcome to Lip Service.
Thank you.
So we're here today to talk about your wonderful life and your long association and friendship with the Rolling Stones. Let's talk about your career and how it began. I mean, you started at Decca Records in London when you were only 16. What was your role there and how did you find yourself in that position?
Well, the initial role was office boy, running around delivering. I worked in the department that oversaw the manufacture of album covers. So I had to take proofs around to show all the label managers proofs of what was coming out. And I remember the big thing at the time was My Fair Lady.
The movie?
Yeah. The stage production was the big thing at the time. But the soundtrack was on Decca. So that I remember that as being my first thing I noticed. Oh, My Fair Lady's the big thing. And then I very quickly got offered a job by Jeff Milne as assistant label manager for London American Records. When London American Records at the time was the holy grail of labels because they had all the great American stuff. So it was a really good job to have. And then I worked there for 2 or 3 years, and then I ended up working for Tony Hall doing promotion. And that was when I started my career proper, I suppose, when I left the head office of Decca and moved up to the promotion department in Hanover Square and started looking after visiting singers and stuff, Brenda Lee and, all those kind of early people like, Little Eva, Del Shannon, all the early people.
You'd been immersed in music since you were a teenager when rock and roll struck you, right?
Well, before I left school, I was immersed. I like music way back, going back to Doris Day and Guy Mitchell or Rosemary Clooney and American music. I always loved the early stuff as well, And then, of course, along came Elvis and rock and roll and changed the face of everything. And then I was completely at the mercy of rock and roll.
So was working at a label like a dream job? Was it everything you expected it to be?
Oh yeah, well it was. I mean, just to see the American pressings coming in and things like that. I just felt like I was part of something that was happening. I was told that the job probably wouldn't last more than 2 or 3 years, and the music business was not going to be a big thing. It was just a trend. But I just thought, I don't care, I'm part of the trend and I'll stay as long as it keeps going. And of course it kept going and going and going and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was a part of it right from the get-go, 5 years before the Beatles showed up.
So tell me about Tony Hall then. Who was Tony? How did you meet Tony?
Tony was a very smooth-looking man. He always wore great mohair suits, and he was a jazz lover primarily, and he used to be a compere at the Flamingo, and he was a jazz man. And then when I went to work for Tony, I turned him on to pop music. I turned him on to Motown, and he always used to credit me with the person who turned him on to pop music, because he was really essentially a jazz boy. And then I started working with him, and I started turning him on to the early Motown hits that were actually not on Motown, they were on Oriole at the time. Do You Love Me by the Contours, and You Beat Me to the Punch, Mary Wells, and loads of others, early Motown. Two Lovers, Mary Wells. I got two lovers and I ain't ashamed. Two lovers and I love them both the same.
And so what did Tony do?
Tony was the head at one time. Tony had two jobs. He was the head of Vogue American, which was Buddy Holly and the Crickets, was on Vogue. And he was the head of promotion, and he worked out of Hanover Square. And there was about half a dozen guys, not even, four. Pat Campbell, Roy Lister, Tony Hall, and myself, and a couple of girls, 2 or 3 girls, and we worked out of Hanover Square doing promotion.
And you said that the Beatles was when you first met them, was when you were with Tony, working with Tony.
No, I worked with Tony before I met the Beatles. I was with Tony when we met the Beatles. We went down to Regent Street, Lower Regent Street, to the BBC studio to a show called Pop In, which featured Keith Fordyce interviewing people when you popped in. You literally popped in and you plugged your latest record. And I was down there with Tony, and we had Chris Montez, who had a record out called Let's Dance. So I was looking after Chris Montez, and I was in the green room, so-called, it was the social part, and in burst these 4 guys, and I went, oh my God, who's this? The energy of them, and it was the Beatles.
I wonder, could you recognise as the youngster at the label, as the pop expert, was it quite apparent that these guys were the sensation they were going to be, and the effect that they had on the industry, on youth culture? Was that quite apparent at the start?
For me it was, because I was a bit of an expert at this point. Even the Beatles were kind of impressed with me because I'd been in the business a few years up until that point. But when they came in, and I loved the record, Love Me Do, I thought it was, they were plugging Please Please Me. And I just thought that they just exuded an aura of stardom straight away. You kind of knew they were going to be something, and of course their music was so good. Please Please Me was such a great record, and of the time, you just knew that they were going to be something. And John Lennon particularly, he stood out. Out of the Beatles, he was the standout.
And moving on to the Rolling Stones then, I think it was soon after that, would have been 64 you saw them for the first time?
Before.
So what, late 63?
Probably. Jeff Milne, who I worked with at Decca head office, London American, had a girl working for him called Chrissy Shrimpton, who was the sister of Gene Shrimpton and the girlfriend of Mick Jagger. And Chrissy said to me, oh, you must come and see my boyfriend's band. So I went to the Scene club in Ham Yard and saw the Rolling Stones, and there was 50 people maybe, it wasn't that crowded.
And what did you think of them?
I preferred the Beatles.
Why?
Well, I like pop. I like pop music, period. I like pop hits, and they seemed a bit more bluesy. And that wasn't really my thing at the time. I liked pop. Subsequently, of course, I became a huge Rolling Stones fan.
Yeah. Were you aware of the sort of nascent blues scene in London?
I wasn't a blues person.
No.
I was a pop person through and through.
Yeah. And round about that time was the first time you met Andrew Oldham as well.
Yeah, I met Andrew when I used to work for Tony out of Hanover Square. And Andrew used to come by the office a lot to talk to Tony. And then he became friendly with me, and we'd go and have a cup of coffee. And then sometimes with his girlfriend Sheila, who became his wife, Sheila Oldham. And Andrew sort of attached himself to me, and he told me he had this band that were the Stones. And at one time he straight away kind of said, "You want to come and work for me?" And I thought, oh no, he's a bit young, he's 17, 18, whatever he was. I thought, no, I'm kind of safer with Tony.
But you were only a couple of years older, right?
Yeah, but I just didn't. I felt safer with Tony. He seemed a bit more of a boss type person.
A sure thing.
So I didn't. Yeah, and also I liked working for Tony Hall, and I loved looking after all the celebrities who came in from America, and Katie Lester, the Ronettes, the Crystals, Johnny Tillotson. I used to spend a lot of time with them, and I loved that job. It was great. I was very good at doing the promotion side of it, but I was good at the social side. I had to take them out for dinner, and had a lot of fun with them, especially the Ronettes, because the Beatles hung around with the Ronettes a lot. So we would go to the Scotch of St James and stay up all night dancing and having a good time.
So what were your impressions of Andrew Luke Oldham then? Why do you think he had that
Well, he was
effect on
very
you?
good looking, very good, elegant man, very sharp dresser, and very... he was slightly impersonating Phil Spector at the time. He was very influenced by Phil Spector. And Phil came over with the Ronettes, and so Andrew and Phil sort of became this dynamic duo around London, driving everybody mad. But he was very, very sharp, was Andrew. I was influenced by his clothes.
And he was managing the Stones at the time. And I wonder what you thought made him an effective manager, his drive and his ambition.
Well, he was a very clever manager because he invented great slogans. Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone being one of them? And he was very good on getting photographers taking great photos of them and everything. And he was very image conscious. And I think a lot of the Stones' early image was down to Andrew, really, because he picked the great Gary Mankiewicz and David Bailey. And he was clued into that because he'd previously worked for Mary Quant, the fashion person. So he was very fashion minded and very image minded. And Andrew was very, very good at imaging. And I think a lot of the Stones' early success was through Andrew's imaging of them and how important that was.
I mean, he was marketing ahead of his time.
Yes. Absolutely, 100%. And he was such an interesting and bright man. And eventually I did end up going to work for him.
Well, he tried to lure you in, and it was unsuccessful at first, but it was Satisfaction specifically that sort of lured you in, wasn't it?
Well, they'd had a couple of hits before that, Heart of Stone and what was the big blues, Little Red Rooster. And they were doing well, but when I went to interview for the job for Andrew, he had an acetate, which was a sort of almost like an early pressing, and they only lasted about 10 or 20 times. You couldn't play them forever. And he said, I've got an acetate of the new Stones recording that we did in Los Angeles with Dave Hassinger, I think it was, did the engineering. And he said, do you want to hear it? And I said, yeah. And he played it to me, and it was Satisfaction. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be, I said to Andrew, this is going to be so huge, Andrew. This is unbelievable. And it just took the Stones into a whole other dimension.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there was John Lennon running around London saying, oh, you've got to hear the Stones record, it's fantastic. Everybody was talking about Satisfaction, including the Beatles.
So personally, for you then, you made the leap from Tony to Andrew. Was it a risk for you at the time? Did it feel like a risk?
I suppose, but I didn't think of it as such. I just thought it was quite exciting.
Well, it was an exciting thing to be a part of, especially
I was
when Satisfaction comes out.
I was more excited than I was worried about myself. I just thought, because Andrew and the Stones by that time were kind of the trendy London scene people, you know. Stones especially, because they weren't like the Beatles. They didn't dress in the uniforms, and they wore sort of their own kind of look, and they were much more individual than the Stones, than the Beatles were at that time. The Beatles were much more uniform.
Clean cut. Clean cut boys.
Sort of, yeah. You know, and they had a very good manager too, Brian Epstein, but he was different from Andrew. He wasn't the same kind of person as Andrew was. He wasn't so trendy and sceney. He was more theatre, kind of quite posh.
Of course. Andrew's office was in Ivor Court off Gloucester Place.
8th floor.
Quite an unorthodox environment, I believe. Can you describe what life was like working in Ivor Court?
Well, Ivor Court was just a very nice block of flats, and it's still there. And the Who were there as well, and Kit Lambert. They were on the 7th floor. We were on the 8th floor, and we had a corner apartment, so to speak, a flat, but which were used as an office. And the only way we could use it as an office is we had to install a bed. So the bed was in my office. And I'd come into work some days and I'd find Keith Richard in bed in my office.
Because he had nowhere else to go.
No, because he'd been out all night, he had nowhere else to go. And I used to walk in and there was Keith fast asleep in my office in the bed. And I used to say, and he'd say, oh, hello, you know, he'd mumble at me and I'd say, I'll see you later on. And then later on I'd pop in and I'd say, do you want a cup of tea? And he'd say, yeah. And I'd go and make him a cup of tea. And then I'd sit and talk to him, because he was a really great person to talk to.
What kind of things would you talk about?
I talked about America, because I was so fascinated with America, and they'd just been to the Chess Checker studios in Chicago, and they'd been to America, so I was fascinated by America. So I got Keith to tell me all about his impressions of America, which he loved, you know, and his visit to Chess Records, and you know, and then we became quite good friends. He had a girlfriend called Linda Keith, rather modelly, glam girl, and she was very friendly with Andrew Oldham's wife, Sheila, two North London Jewish girls, you know, and very sharp ladies. And then I became quite friendly with Keith and Keith and Linda. And Anita came later, of course. But, you know, and I used to hang out with them a bit. And Sheila and Andrew and I and Keith and Linda sometimes would go out together and have dinner or something. And then we all started smoking a little bit, smoking dope. Keith was the last one on the bus, really. He was a bit resistant at first, and then, of course, he joined in.
So tell me about what your role was there. What was your day-to-day?
Well, I was
job?
A promotion man, but then Andrew started Immediate Records, which was the first Immediate was the first independent promotion, independent label, and Hang On Sloopy was the first record that we put out by the McCoys, and I had to plug that, and I had stuffed all the envelopes. I sent all the envelopes out myself, posted them myself, addressed them myself, went round to the producers of all the programs by myself, promoting, and it got in the top 30 the first week. Well, Andrew was seriously impressed with my abilities as a promotion man, and he took me for lunch with Tony Calder, his partner at the time. They took me to ISO's in Soho, which was a very famous Jewish restaurant that everybody used to go to. It took me for a celebration lunch. So I promoted Chris Farlow's Out of Time, First Cut is the Deepest, P.P. Arnold. A lot of immediate became quite a successful label, Small Faces. I'd left by that time. I went to work for George Martin after that.
There was a great line you used in an interview I read online. You were talking about how Keith Richards didn't see Satisfaction as a hit single, but Andrew did. And there was a line that you said was, Andrew always knew. And I wonder what Andrew's instincts were like and how he was so kind of successful in going with these kind of instinctive methods.
Well, God, that's a difficult question to answer because I don't know how Andrew felt as a person, but as I observed him as a person, he was very sharp and he was onto things, But the music side of it, well, Andrew believed in Satisfaction, of course, and so did Mick, but Keith wasn't sure, and it took a bit of convincing to get him to come on board with it, and then he did, and then of course it became what it became. But Andrew was, unfortunately, as much as I love Andrew and I work with Andrew, he became a bit difficult to work with him because the drug taking and got in the way a little bit, unfortunately.
I mean, it was probably quite pervasive everywhere, right?
It was, and people didn't know how far to take it, and some people went from just smoking dope to maybe doing other things that were much more dangerous.
Yeah.
And smack was around and things like that, not such a great thing to take. But I think Andrew was always caught up in imaging a lot, more imaging than music. I think he loved imaging himself and other people.
I think it's in your book. There's a line that Charlie Watts said he'd never seen anyone as gay as that new guy in the office.
Me
talking about yourself.
I saved Charlie's cat from death.
Yeah, and that's how you became friends, right?
Yeah, and I had to go and reclaim the vet money. And he said to Shirley, his wife, God, I've never met anybody so gay as that man. He told me later when we became great friends. Shirley said to me, Charlie thought you were the gayest person he'd ever met. I said, oh, really? Maybe I was a bit more gay then than I am now.
So tell me about that friendship with Charlie then. How did it develop? I mean, he was quite different from the other Stones in that he was very private.
With us it developed because of Louise the cat, because I saved Louise who had a broken leg and the vet wanted to put her down and I wouldn't allow him to.
So Charlie was away at the time, right? Yeah,
I was in America with Shirley on a Stones tour, and I found this vet called Dr. Butt, who I think is still around over at Gloucester Road, and he mended the cat's leg by rebuilding it with wire. And so I became quite friendly with Charlie and Shirley, and then they moved to Lewes in Sussex. And I said, oh, my mum lives in Sussex, she lives in Eastbourne. And then they said, well, pop over sometime. So I did. And they were going to the cinema at the time. They said, oh, we'll come another weekend. And they invited me over, and I went over and stayed the night. And our friendship developed, and we became great friends. And we'd go on holidays together. We went to Loire Valley together. They bought a house in France. I'd spend holidays with them. And when I moved to America later in my career, they would come and visit me. And then their daughter became my goddaughter. And then their goddaughter asked me if I would be godfather to her daughter. So I'm godfather to Serafina and Charlotte. And they became a very important part of my life.
So where did the the seeds of your friendship come from? What kind of shared interest did you have with Charlie? What made him such a good friend?
Don't know, humour. He was very funny.
Very
Charlie.
dry wit.
Oh, wonderful dry wit. And just general, just a lovely person to be around. And Shirley too. Shirley was a big influence on my life. She had the best taste of anybody, and mostly it was the humour, because they thought I was very funny, and I could make them laugh. And sometimes I'd talk, and Charlie would start laughing, and I'd say, "Why are you laughing, Charlie?" And he'd say, "Oh, the way you put things makes me laugh always." He just used to laugh at my turn of phrase and everything. But the kindness factor, I think the fact that I had saved Louise said it all, because they knew I was a kind person.
Out of all your skills in the office, one of them was rolling joints. You sort of said that you became the unofficial joint roller in the office. At that time in the 60s, before drugs got too overbearing, was smoking dope quite conducive to the way that you guys worked?
Work only when you went to Ready Steady Go.
At the weekend.
At the weekend, then you'd smoke a joint. But sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, a lot of the times when I was working, when I was doing promotion, stuffing envelopes and doing that, I wasn't stoned, because you have to be pretty busy to do that kind of stuff. So it was part of the social network, though, where if you went out to the Scotch of St James in the evening, where the Beatles were and the Stones were and the Animals were, of course you were smoking dope, But there again, you couldn't just sit there and smoke it. You had to smoke it very quietly, because there was a policeman, I think it was Pilcher was it? Was busting everybody. He got Brian, he got John, and you couldn't just smoke dope openly. You had to be very quiet about it. We'd often go to Tony Hall's flat before we went out, and we'd hang out at Tony Hall's and smoke dope there before we went out, because you didn't want to be caught with it.
I mean, other people were overindulging. Let's say Andrew wrote in his book that even by 1965, Brian Jones was a daily liability. Did you see
Brian,
it that way?
no, sadly. Brian was a fallen angel, really. That's what I always look upon him as, because he had that slightly angelic look about him, with the hair, and the whole sort of appearance of him was that of a fallen angel. But he really went too far. And he was not. I always got on well with Brian, but he could be very unpleasant with his girlfriends, and there was always this, this thing of him being a little bit violent at times.
Yeah.
And he just, he went down the wrong road, and of course he didn't last.
No, he was always, it seems, in some kind of power struggle with Mick and Keith. They're the creative catalyst of the band, and you've got Andrew in their camp. You were very close to Andrew. Did he sort of resent you in any way to being part of their camp rather than?
Well, there was this whole gang thing, and it was Mick and Keith at the time, and Andrew, and Brian was on the outs. And so Brian was never really included. Charlie, of course, was off being himself, as was Bill. So Brian was left outside of the gang, because the gang was Andrew, Mick and Keith. And, when we went up to Thank You Lucky Stars, I remember we went in Andrew's Rolls Royce with Eddie, his driver, and there was Andrew, Mick and Keith and myself, smoking dope all the way up to Birmingham. Well stoned by the time we arrived.
I bet.
And they had a record player, and Andrew had a record player in his car, play 45s. So we'd be listening to the Four Tops singing, I Can't Help Myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Yeah. And we went up to we went up to Birmingham. I remember we stopped off at a Greasy Spoon to get some lunch, and we were so stoned we couldn't hardly order from the menu. We couldn't read it practically. We were so stoned. And Keith said something like, Mick said something like, well, I think I'll start with tomato soup. And Keith said, oh, great starter, and started applauding. We were so stupid.
And people probably had no idea that you guys were stoned. Just thought you were...
No, they just thought we were stupid. And we were stupid.
So you left immediately after about a year. You said in your book it was getting too much. Was it the drugs or the work, or what was it that was getting too much?
Well, mostly the drug situation, because Andrew would go off to Switzerland to have health cures, and he would disappear for two weeks at a time and then come back and be all okay, and then the same thing would happen again. And it just became rather difficult. And then I got offered a job by George Martin's Air London, and I thought that sounded much more stable, which it was.
Yeah, of course.
And I went to work for George, and I left Andrew, and I went to work for George and Peter Sullivan and Ron Richards and John Burgess, who formed an independent production company called Air London, the first independent production company in England. They all left EMI and started their own production company, and they needed a plugger, and I was their plugger, because that's what I was known as.
Yeah.
I was a very good plugger.
That job eventually led you to Apple, working with the Beatles. And that's when your paths first crossed with Alan Klein, who'd just come out of litigation with the Stones. How did you find Alan?
I got on Alan. People think that I'm really bullshitting, but I really got on well with Alan.
Do you think he reserved that, what he's sort of characterised now, for the people that he was trying to get at? Do you think he was actually friendly behind the curtain?
It wasn't so much the friendliness, it was that he was so knowledgeable about people's careers, and John and music. He was very musically astute, and he knew a lot, and he was very kind to me and gave me a good job at Apple, and was very good to me, treated me well. He knew that I was good at what I did, and he respected me, and he always did, right up till the end. He always used to say, because we became good friends, and I would go and have dinner with him in New York, and he said to me, I reminded him of Montgomery Clift, the actor. He said, you're like Montgomery Clift. He said, you're good looking in the same way. And when I went to America for Apple, and I went to his office, he was always great to me, always kind to me.
So do you think it's unfair that after his experiences with the Stones and the Beatles that he's kind of painted as this hustler?
Well, some of that was true. You can't say he wasn't, but he was a likeable hustler. Very likeable for me.
In the 70s, you worked with John Lennon, and then you later went to work at RCA. Did you have much contact with the Stones in that time?
Mostly in New York, because Mick was living in New York. So I'd see him when Charlie came into town.
Yeah, so you were living in New York as well at that point.
Yeah, I was living in New York, and so Charlie would come into town, and I'd see Keith with Charlie, and I'd see Mick with Charlie. Because Charlie would say, I'm going over to see Mick, you want to come over? Because he knew that Mick liked me and got on with me and everything. So
enjoyed your company. He enjoyed your company.
Enjoyed my company, and Keith did too. So I went over to Keith's as well. By this time he was with Patty. Had been through his Anita period, and he was with Patty.
Yeah.
And I used to see Mick, and then sometimes we go to a club, the Roxy. We went to the Roxy once with Mick and Charlie, and Paradise Garage. I took Charlie to Paradise Garage, and I said, you've got to go see this place, Charlie. You just have to experience it one time, because the sound is unbelievable.
Well, he loved dancing, didn't he?
Huh?
He loved dancing.
No, Charlie couldn't dance to save his life.
But he liked dance music, right?
Oh, he likes dance music. Yeah, he loved good dance music.
Yeah. R&B
dance music, not pop dance music, but the R&B side of it he liked. Mm-hmm. And I used to make him tapes, he and Shirley, because at this time they had a house in France that they used to spend a lot of time in, and I was living in America, and I used to make them tapes of all the latest Rock Your Boat, remember?
So he was a disco fan.
Oh, me, major.
And Charlie?
Major disco fan. I've still got all my, sitting behind me, there's a load of disco records. I've still got the 12 inches. They're in the next office room. Yeah, I love disco. The early disco, because it was like Motown. The early disco was kind of like another Motown because it was R&B with a dance beat, you know. It was really good. I've got some great early disco records.
You started working again professionally with Mick as he started to prep She's the Boss around 1984?
Yeah, because I'd worked with John prior to that on his album.
John Lennon.
Yeah, John Lennon, yes. And
your friend John.
I always say John. and I'd worked with I'd worked with John, and so I went to Mick, and I knew that he was looking for someone to deal with his album, and I put myself forward, and I was working at RCA at the time, and Mick said, aren't you happy in your job? Don't you like your job at RCA? And I said, I'm not a corporate person, Mick. I don't really like working in a corporate situation. And he said, well, if you come and work with me, I'll give you 6 months trial. So he gave me 6 months. And 6 months went by, and I said, oh, Mick, it's 6 months. He said, already? I said, yeah. He said, well, you better stay on then. And I stayed on for another 20 odd years.
There was quite intense tension around that point, Keith and Mick.
Oh.
Were you kind of trepidatious about getting involved?
Oh God, I got caught right in the middle of it several times over the years.
Well, he must
my
have.
God.
But he must have resented the fact that Mick was going solo.
Yeah, by this time they just didn't see eye to eye.
No.
And I got in the middle of it because Keith knew me, and he knew that I was straightforward. He knew that I was likable because he used to hang out with me. So he couldn't say that I wasn't a nice person or I wasn't an honest person. He knew I was honest, and he knew I was okay, but he still resented me for working for Mick. Well, and he made that quite clear that he didn't like me working for Mick. And I said, yeah, but at the same time, Keith, I am a Stones fan. And I do think eventually you're probably going to end up working together again. And, I'm still a believer in the Stones brand as a band, you know.
And so he must have known that you were sincere in that.
He knew and also I got on very well with Jane, his manager, who was not always easy to get on with. Jane was and is quite tough when she wants to be, as managers have to be sometimes.
Absolutely.
But Jane and I became and are great friends. And then I got on with Keith's dad. I used to look after his dad at the shows, and then Patty and I became friendly, and then his daughters liked me. So he was surrounded by a family who all liked me. So he had to, in the end, he had to get. Years later, he gave up, and he finally said to me, do you want to come up to my room after the show? And I said no. I didn't go because I thought, no, it's not my territory. I'm not going.
Yeah. You said in your book that working on She's the Boss was a bit more challenging than you thought it was going to be, a lot of juggling. What made it so challenging?
When we started doing promotion, Mick was also recording Dirty Work with the Stones. So we were in Paris and we were doing promotion for She's the Boss and recording Dirty Work in the evening, and there was really not a very nice atmosphere going around, you know. And Charlie was on heroin.
Yes, it was a rough time.
Yeah, Charlie was on smack. Keith was doing lots of coke. Mick was being very busy and manipulating and sort of trying to get his solo career off the ground, but at the same time recording with the Stones. It was a very, 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 very difficult time, but I managed.
I mean, that must have been no easy feat given their separation.
It wasn't, but the good thing was I had worked with them before in the 60s, and they all knew me as a straight shooter. So I had that on my side because they all got on with me quite well. So they couldn't say, "Oh, this new person is nasty." I wasn't so new because they'd known me from the 60s. So.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Charlie's drug use there. What led Charlie to do that so late in life?
I don't know. He always admired jazz people, and Chet Baker and people like that who ended up on Smack, and Charlie Parker and everything. It was always sort of a little bit of a jazz thing with Charlie,
So I think he romanticised it somehow.
A little bit, yeah. And then I think all the trouble around the Stones and all the turmoil and everything. And then because of the heroin, he and Shirley hit a really bad patch. Their marriage was threatened by it. It was a very difficult time. That was really difficult because I had only ever known Charlie as a very nice, affable man, and then all of a sudden I'm dealing with this smackhead. And it was kind of difficult to say the least, especially when he would be so horrible to Shirley. We go out for dinner and he'd be really unpleasant to Shirley, and I was kind of shocked. I thought, "Stop it, Charlie."
That's not like him.
No, but no, it wasn't like him. And eventually he straightened up, but it took a while.
And you'd recently straightened up yourself. You'd got sober.
I got sober in 1981, and Mick offered me the job in 1984. So when I went to work for Mick, I was already sober 3 years.
So did you try and help Charlie in any way, or is that something that you can't help someone with?
The thing about AA and what they say in AA, which I've always adhered to, is it's not a program of promotion. It's a program of attraction. So you stay sober and people notice you're sober and they ask you, "How come you're like this?" And then you can say. Mm-hmm. So Charlie always knew that I was kind of straight. And Shirley said to me one day in London when we'd been to a wedding and she was a bit drunk, and we sat in the kitchen of their flat in Cheney Walk, and she said to me, "How come you don't drink, Tony? What's the secret?" And I said, "Well, it's simple, Shirley. I go to AA meetings." And then Shirley got sober. She went off to rehab and got sober. And then once she got sober, then Charlie ended up getting sober himself. So, I think probably I influenced it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you saw the Stones then at their lowest ebb. I mean, that was the worst
lowest.
Part. So what ultimately kept them together to get through that?
Prince Rupert, their manager at the time, Prince Rupert Lowenstein, started talking to Michael Cole about doing a tour with the Stones. And Prince Rupert and he negotiated a very lucrative tour that could happen were they to speak and work together again. And Rupert very strongly put his foot down and said, "Here it is. It's up to you. You either agree to work together again, or we say that's the end."
So it's a very big golden carrot being dangled in front of them.
And he was saying, and also an alternative of, you either do this or that's the finish of it. And then Mick and Keith went off to Montserrat or somewhere. No, it was Barbados or somewhere. They went off, and they started to write together again. And then the tour got booked, and then they came back together again for this giant tour, which was the biggest tour anybody had ever done.
I mean, it was a bit of a game changer, not just for the Stones, but the industry as well.
Well, set design, lighting, everything. And the touring and the money that could be made and the sponsorship and the T-shirt money and everything, the merchandise became a big part of the touring thing. and it was the biggest tour ever at the time.
Well, you were asked to go on the tour. It was the Steel Wheels tour. You said in your book that the scale of it was almost a bit intimidating.
Well, the set itself that Mark Fisher designed was so operatic in its scale that we went to see Louis just outside New York somewhere. Where was it? We went to have a look at it, and they had to move it sideways on into the building because it was so big. And we went and looked at it, and everybody looked at it and went, "Wow, what is this?" It was like a great operatic thing with stairways and platforms and what. And Mick had to go up and look and see, how am I going to work this because it's so big? But we did. He did, of course. But he had to learn how to rework his act in a way because of the scale of this particular stage.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover, like literally.
Yeah, I mean, they'd already had some great stages before, like the Lotus Flower in 1975 that opened up, you know, and the outdoor show where he had to run along the outside stage, you know, that famous film Let's Spend the Night Together where he's running around.
Yeah.
But Steel Wheels was entirely different.
I mean, it was a big production.
Huge production, not just big. We had two planes that carried equipment. We'd be playing a show in one venue, and the next venue were already building the duplicate stage that you had to slot all the sound stuff into, you know.
You mostly worked with Mick on that tour. I think you were putting him in front of people, doing promo. But he's also a very good interviewee. He's very adaptable. What do you think makes Mick so good with reporters and the press and in that situation?
Les Perrin.
The old PR guy.
Les Perrin taught Mick all he knew. Les Perrin was the 60s guru of PR, and he did the Lewis court case when they got sentenced to prison. And I was very friendly with Les. Lovely man. But he was the PR, and he taught Mick. And then Mick picked up because Mick is like a sponge, he picks up things from everybody.
And also languages as well, right? He's fluent French and things.
He's fluent in French. Well, he's got a chateau, as you do. And he's very good in French, yes. He speaks fluent French, and he does interviews in French.
And he trusted you to get the right people in front of him.
Well, we had PR people like Bernard Doherty and Frank Curtis in America subsequently, and they would submit, and then the record company would submit their plans, and Mick and I would go through the plans, and Jane would go through it with Keith, and we'd select what we thought was good. We do usually one, maybe two TVs, a couple of radios, and some print for each territory going around the world. Because we had to cover not just America, but Europe and
the whole world, yeah,
and Japan, and subsequently China and Australia. You know, so it was quite taxing at times.
You said in your book that Mick would often ask you for feedback after the shows.
Oh yeah.
How honest could you be?
Oh, very honest.
What kind of things would you say? If it was a great show or if it was a bad show, like what? How would you?
I'd say that wasn't very good. He'd say, "How was it?" I'd say, "It wasn't very good tonight. It didn't feel good."
So the order of the songs, or?
Well, when they were opening the second tour, the Voodoo Lounge, I think it was. Mm-hmm. I went to... No, it wasn't. It was the one where they had the walkway out to the centre.
Bridges to Babylon.
Yeah. And I remember they had to leave the main stage and go to the centre stage. Mm-hmm. And there was no music. And it was dead time. And I said to Mick afterwards, backstage, he said, "How is it?" And I said, "Well, there's a huge gap, Mick." And he said, "What is it?" I said, "Well, you walk from the main stage out to the centre stage. You've got no music. It's dead air and it's not good." And he went, "Oh my God, that's not good." So the next day he had Peter Wolf from Jay Giles' band up to his suite and they worked out some music, and I was having to get some approvals, and Mick was so short with me that day. He said, "Tony, I can't do the approvals. I've got to do this music." And I'd say, "All right." I said, "Can I get Charlie to approve?" He said, "Yeah, get Charlie to approve and take his approval as being the one." And I said, "Fine, okay." And he did this music with Peter Wolf, and then when the tour opened, they did have some segue music from the centre stage to the middle stage, and of course it made a huge difference.
Absolutely, you obviously had a profound effect. You were quite used to dealing with temperamental artists and having to deal with situations, but apparently there was one person at an event in Las Vegas, a future president, that you had a brush with.
No, it was Atlantic City.
Atlantic City, sorry.
It was Atlantic City. Well, I didn't have a brush with him. The band and the management had a brush with him because we were playing the hotel that he owned.
And it was Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, Donald Trump's hotel. But the venue was ours for the evening because we paid for it. And we were doing a pay-per-view show with Axl Rose and Eric Clapton and Bo Diddley, which was going to go around the world pay-per-view. And we were doing a press event to publicise the pay-per-view event. And Donald Trump wanted to be a part of our press conference, and we said no. You know, it's
nothing to do with you.
And he was flexing his muscles because it was his hotel, but it wasn't the venue. We had purchased the venue. Sure. It was ours. And he got very annoyed that he couldn't be a part of our press conference, and there was all kinds of threatening behaviour going on. And I remember during the press conference, he came in and stood at the back, just about 6 feet away from me, staring at Mick with that now famous scowling face, looking at the Stones because he wasn't up there. And who would ever known that this man would be who he is now, you know?
I mean, it says a lot about his ego, doesn't it?
Well, and also how it's kind of unpleasant bullying attitude he had.
Yeah, and the tactics he uses.
Yeah, and it was very nasty, and it was a sort of threatening, bullying attitude that he had that nobody enjoyed. And and our crew were ready for a bit of spot of bother if that came up, but it didn't come up. But no one was thrilled, especially probably Michael Cole, who promoted the tour. I think Michael had a few run-ins with him, Yeah. I didn't personally have any. I just observed him, and what I observed wasn't very nice.
No, it's a bad flavour in your mouth.
Yeah, well, he just had that horrible Donald Trump face, the one that he adopts when he's trying to look tough.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It's bullshit.
So you think you worked on 6 tours in total, is that right? So that'd be
quite a few.
Steel Wheels, Voodoo Lounge, Bridges to Babylon, No Security Licks, Bigger Bang.
Yeah, that was it. I ended on Bigger Bang.
You went out with a bang.
Yeah, I'd had enough by that time. I was tired. My suitcase is in the cupboard next door, and it hasn't come down since then. Oh yes, it did, because I went away I went before lockdown.
How did you see those kind of tours develop? So when you left and when you started, there was obviously a huge difference.
Well, they became so slick and organised. It was like a corporation on tour. It was like a business on tour. We all knew how to do. We were all good at it. I mean, the thing that really changed a lot was when, for me and for the band as a band, was when Mick lost his voice on a tour a couple of times, and when we went to go out again, I think it was for 40 Licks, the insurance people laid the law down and said Mick had to take care of himself more. Mm-hmm. And we got a vocal coach who did Lisa Fisher and Lady Gaga and Don, his name was. And he made such a difference to Mick's voice. I mean, amazing. When he came in to rehearse for the tour, The sound guy said to me, "You wait till you hear Mick, you won't believe it. His voice is amazing." And it was. The range, it was fantastic. And of course, and then Mick started to take his whole persona so seriously: exercise, dance, diet. He's a great trainer, Tori, who's been with him for years. Always meticulous with the food he ate, with the dance routines that he rehearsed, the exercise routines. It's just amazing that he could, last year at the age of 81, still look fantastic on stage. Amazing.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
I don't know where he gets the energy.
Well, because he does all that.
Yeah, of course. It obviously works.
Does all that.
I mean, you were very lucky to see so many shows. I wonder, do any stand out? Any performances stick in your memory?
Well, the one I stand out for me was one that I wasn't on tour with, was Passaic, New Jersey, for Some Girls.
Oh, yes.
I thought they were incredible.
So you went in the audience?
Well, I went up to watch them record Some Girls in Woodstock. Charlie invited me up, and I went up to see them in Woodstock when they were recording Some Girls, and I realised at the time, I thought, oh, this is going to be some album, because I heard Miss You and stuff like that, I thought, oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. And then I went to see the Passaic, New Jersey show, and it was the first time they'd been on stage since Woodstock, since recording this album, and they were hot. It's the hottest I ever saw them. And then on the giant tours, I would say there was some. I remember they played a great show in Memphis. Sometimes cities that had music history were always better because the audiences were better.
And it adds to the rich experience, I expect, being somewhere.
Yeah,
so
like
immersed.
Memphis was cool, great, cool audience. And actually, later on, Japan, once they got over the fact of being shy and started to get more crazy, they were kind of fun. But nothing will ever beat Passaic, New Jersey.
I mean, the tours must have been incredible, and I know that there was a lot of very special backstage guests, and the guest lists themselves were spectacular. Who do you think were the most sort of memorable meetings you made backstage?
Well, I remember out on the centre, the celebs used to come and watch it from where I used to sit, where the lighting guys were. So, it was always U2 coming all the time. Springsteen would come all the time. Streisand came. No Madonna. Elton would come, of course. Just loads of them. They just rolled out one after the other. It was a big thing. Sometimes, what's his name from Apple?
Oh, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs would come a lot. All the Apple people would come when we hit Seattle, and they showed us all their computers, their new stuff. And the Hungarian guy who invented Word, who I became quite friendly with, he had an incredible boat. And I went on his boat, which was amazing. It had a helicopter landing pad, and it had... it was just ridiculous. So, we ended up mixing with those people a lot when we came to Seattle. And, Streisand came, and Barbara Streisand came the same night as Meryl Streep. And they were standing on the soundboard with everybody else. And Meryl Streep's husband was there as was her child. And there was a spare soundboard that belonged to the opening act that we'd pushed into the back and covered it up with a protective covering. And Meryl's husband tried to put their daughter asleep on it. I said, "You can't. That's the soundboard. You can't rest her on that." And he looked quite shocked. And I said, "No, I'm sorry. You just cannot do that." But Streisand was very interested. She wanted to know all the ins and outs of it because she was shortly going to tour, and she wanted to know. She was asking lots of questions.
See how the best did it.
Yeah.
After you left the Stones, you went to work with Elton John.
Yes.
Your good friend. What made that decision easy for you to sort of leave from one to the other?
Well, it didn't happen straight away. I was still on the Stones payroll, but only as sort of like what would you call it, advisor.
A consultant.
A consultant, that's the word I'm looking for. I was a consultant, and I wasn't paid a fantastic amount of money to be a consultant, but it kept me ticking along. Mm-hmm. And Elton said to me that he wanted to offer me a job, but he didn't have a job to offer me. And I was on holiday with him in the south of France when he said that, and I said, that's fine, don't worry about it, Elton, because we were old friends. We'd known each other since 1967, something like that. So then he said it a year later. We were again in the south of France on our way to Saint-Tropez in his boat, and he said to me, I still want to offer you a job, but I still don't have a job to offer you. And I said, Elton, don't worry about it, honest. I'm not that bothered. When something comes along, I'll know. And I was in this room where we're sitting now, and the phone went, and I picked up the phone, and it was Elton, and he said, I've got a conversation to have with you. And I knew I was on speakerphone. I could hear I was on speakerphone. So I said, do I stand or do I sit? I was over there in that room. And he said, up to you. I said, I'll stand to start with. And he said, well, I've got a show coming up in Las Vegas, and I don't have a creative director. Would you be interested in being the creative director of my Las Vegas show? And I was stunned, you know. I'd never been creative director of any show, let alone the Las Vegas one. And I stood there and I said, well, what does that mean to me, Elton? And he said, it means you get more money, Tony. I said, okay.
Well, what else do you say?
So I did, and then in the evening he called me and he said, I didn't realise at the time that there was a big panic going on, and that's why I was on speakerphone, because he didn't have a team, and the show was meant to kick off in September, and this was May, and they didn't have a show. And then in the evening he called me. He said, I'm thinking of getting Mark Fisher and Patrick Woodruff. What do you think? I said, you couldn't get any better. They are the best.
Yeah.
So he got them, and then we had a meeting with him. We went down to Woodside, where he lives in Windsor. We had a meeting, we went through the show, and he said, okay, well, I'll see you in September then. And when we left, Mark and Patrick said, is he serious? So I said, yeah, probably. We had one more meeting with him, and that was it. And then we went ahead and planned the show. And then I met Sam Pattinson. They recommended Sam, and I worked on the visuals. Patrick did lights. Mark did wonderful staging for the Vegas show, and Sam and I worked on all the visuals together. And it all came together very wonderfully well, and it was a huge success.
Yeah.
And in fact, had it not been for the farewell tour, it could have still run, because it was still selling out when we stopped it.
But it was the beginning of a great run with you and Elton working together.
Yeah, it was fabulous. I love working with him again. Mm-hmm. It was wonderful, because we worked together on Rocket when I was vice president, executive vice president of Rocket Records in California. But this was different, and I was so proud of that show because it was such a huge success, and I felt like come on, to be thrown in the deep end like that. But it's amazing what you can do if it lands in your lap. You just barrel forward, and I did, Sam was wonderful to work with. Totally brilliant, and is totally brilliant. He's still working on the Sphere now in Las Vegas. And we've just made this little film together that's going to be launched on you at some point.
Well, I look forward to it. Your friendship with the Stones endured all through that time. Mick is on the cover of your book, The Tastemaker. Did you have to run anything past him? Did you consult with him or warn him about...
I never consult. I think they knew, because I told Joyce Smith, their manager, that I was doing a book, and I said, don't worry, no one has to worry. And I told Jane, and I said, Jane, no one has to worry. and no one worried.
Yeah.
And it came out, and at the Christmas it got one of the best rock books of the year in the Sunday Times.
That's right, yeah.
And Mick sent me a lovely text saying, "Oh, well done." He said, "I see you do books done well on the Times. Well done." So that was an approval right there.
Absolutely, yeah. So you knew you hadn't done anything to annoy
yeah,
them.
And Jane said, everybody was fine with it, you know. And a lot of people said to me, "It's such a nice book because you're just not mean about people." I said, "Why be mean? No one was nasty to me."
Yeah.
They were difficult, but they were never nasty. Even Keith, who could be difficult, was never nasty to me. Never.
Can you tell me about how you heard the news about Charlie's passing?
Oh, it's a very sad weekend because I was diagnosed, I forget which order it is, whether it's a Friday or a Tuesday. One was one day. I think it was the Friday I was diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Yeah, I think Charlie died maybe the Tuesday, Wednesday, wasn't it?
And Charlie died on the Tuesday.
Yeah.
So that was a tough weekend.
It was a double blow.
Huh?
A double blow.
Yeah. And then Shirley, his wife, died a year or so later.
Of course, yeah.
And Serafina, his daughter, has inherited everything. And Charlotte, his granddaughter.
Yeah.
Serafina's still in touch with me. She sent me a beautiful... I had a birthday recently. She sent a bouquet that covered that table and a basket over there of stuff from Fortnum and Mason. But, you know, I miss Charlie terribly.
Yeah. And you went to his memorial at Ronnie Scott's and you got to see the band again.
I did.
I mean, obviously, it's a sad situation, but was it sort of good to see everyone?
It was wonderful. It was such an evening of affection. Everybody, Keith and Patty and the girls were so nice to me. They made such a fuss of me. I was so taken aback. Tone, you know, it was big reunion, you know, they were so sweet to me, all of them. And Mick came, I was talking to somebody and Mick came and stood at my shoulder and never told me he was there. And I saw the person I was talking to, I saw their eyes widen. And I went, "What's the matter?" And they nodded at me and I turned around and there was Mick. I said, "Were you standing behind my back?" And we had a lovely chat.
You and I had got to share a great moment. You remember we went to Christie's before they sold Charlie's Effects. They were auctioning off all his like first edition books, wasn't it? And jazz memorabilia and everything. And we had a lovely time. And you left there, and you said something like, "You learnt something new." Because this wasn't the sort of the Charlie, you'd never seen these things. You weren't aware of them. But you left feeling very special, like you'd learned something new about your friend. What did that day mean to you?
Well, I knew he was a collector.
Yeah, you knew he had them.
But I didn't know that he had this incredible collection of first edition books, which he kept in the house in Montpellier Street in South Kensington. And I said, "Well, where did he keep them?" I asked the curator, I think you were with me. And he said, "In the top room of the house." And I never knew they were there. And of course, the day that we went, we saw Bill Wyman, didn't we?
That's right, yes.
Bill Wyman.
And he was just as surprised as well with the
we were
array.
I mean, the breadth of his collection was amazing. You know, he had some amazing things. But he was a good collector of all kinds of things, you know.
Mm-hmm. Your house here is a bit of a shrine to your own career and your legacy.
Is. It's surrounded by things.
Do you have any favourite Rolling Stones related keepsakes, the things that remind you of Charlie or your time with the band?
Charlie gave me that. It's an illustration by a man called Sem. And somebody came round here and they knew who it was, and they wrote on the back, which we can look at later because it's up there now, a detail of what it was and who it was. That was from him. That was from Mick.
This painting in the middle.
That in the centre was from Mick. That was from John Lennon. The Marilyn Monroe was John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
That's Sam Pattinson to commemorate the Las Vegas show. That was our thing for Mona Lisa's and Mad Hatters. That was from Elton from the last tour. That was from Mike Hazelwood, who wrote It Never Rains in Southern California, my dear friend. So they're all over the place.
There are treasures, and there's Mick Jagger.
I
Andy
bought
Warhol
that
print.
for $800.
Wow.
It's worth more now because it's a Warhol.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not just art, is it? It's memories of friends.
Oh yeah, there's one around here that Charlie gave me, a wonderful painting around here, 1930s painting Charlie gave me. Fantastic stuff. Charlie and Elton gave me those picture frames. Shirley and Charlie gave me those candles, the frog candlesticks. They're from Charlie and Shirley. There's loads of stuff here, loads of stuff.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, Tony, we're going to end with our 5x5, the regular questions that we ask everyone. Firstly, what is your favourite Rolling Stones song?
Moonlight Mile.
What is your favourite Rolling Stones album?
Some Girls.
What is a deep cut or underrated Stones song that you think deserves more love?
Casino Boogie.
That's a great choice. In your opinion, what makes the Rolling Stones such an enduring and influential band?
Well, they had it all, didn't they? They had the looks, they had the music, they had the attitude, and they were of the time.
And finally, if you could describe the Stones in just 3 words, what would they be?
Hard as nails.
Thank you so much, Tony. And that's it for this episode of Lip Service. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed my conversation with Tony, please do like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. It all really helps in spreading the word. You can also follow us on all the socials. We are at Stones Lip Pod, where you'll find updates, clips, and more stories from the Rolling Stones universe. Another episode is coming very soon. Till the next time, we say goodbye.